Good afternoon, everyone, or good morning, or evening if you're virtual. Welcome to IETF116, the Gen Dispatch Working Group meeting. It's nice to be here. Okay, so my name is Kirsty Fain, here with the co-chair Martin Vigler. If you have not seen this yet, then please note well. You should have seen this when you registered. You should have seen it in every working group meeting, but please behave in a respectable way and participate in the IETF in a way that allows everyone to contribute to their fullest extent. Some meeting tips. If you are virtual, then please keep your audio and your video off unless you are chairing or presenting or speaking. Please use a headset. If you're in person, then please make sure you have scanned the QR code for Blue Sheets and you have joined using the Meet Echo Lite on-site tool, which you can find linked from the agenda. If you have any trouble with it, just ask somebody nearby to you. Chances are you've all done this very successfully throughout the week. Here are some resources for the agenda and any other information on meeting preparation. And if you need any technical assistance, please check this link first. All right, so let's get started. Here is the agenda for our meeting today. As you can see, we've got a few items and we've got some time now for any agenda bashing or questions or problems with the agenda. Going once, going twice. Okay. All right, so let's get started then. So up first, oh.
I should have done it all from the beginning. Yeah. Just before we start, I'll say a few words as chair, but saying thank you to Kirsty. The walk wasn't very long, but we enjoyed it, and I'll miss you. And Shuping, who's sitting here, welcome to you. And I'm very pleased to be working with you in the future.
And likewise from my side as AD. So it's always hard to find chairs. In this case, it was easy twice because I had first Kirsty is an excellent candidate to take over from whoever it was before, Pete, I think. And then Shuping following Kirsty, and everybody else who volunteered that I couldn't choose because I only had one seat. I did put you on my little list of names of people that I will get back to for future openings. So don't be surprised if you get email from me saying, hey, you said a while ago that you were interested in doing this. Would you consider doing that instead? So, but thanks and welcome.
Kirsty was great for us in dispatch too over in art, and that was a much more elegant send off than I gave her. So.
There's still time. Okay, great. Thank you, everyone. Thanks for the kind words. And so now I guess we can start with our agenda. So yeah, up first, it's Sean and Jay presenting about updating meeting venue requirements. So we'll run the slides for you. Just shout when you're.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Sean Turner. I'm mostly here just to kind of provide an introduction, then we're going to hand it over to Jay. You know, in our process of professionalizing the workings of the IETF, one of the things we do is like to, review requirements that we set in stone. And some of these were pretty old. And one of the ones that usually is pretty contentious is like how much it's going to cost to come to the meeting. So we said, Jay, go off and go start looking at this stuff. And then a bunch of other questions started popping up and what could we look at changing? And that's kind of the genesis of how this all happened. So that's just kind of an introduction to say, if you want to shoot anybody for why this happened, you can shoot me.
Thank you. Next slide, please. Thank you. So this is, I'm going to work on the basis that you haven't read the draft, but not give you enough information to feel comfortable that you haven't read the draft and leave you still slightly worrying that you should have read the draft, okay? So this is a series of recommendations and proposals to the community from the Administration LLC following a review largely of RFC 8718. At some point, we're going to discuss the appropriateness of the LLC doing a review of a community BCP that tells the LLC what to do, but we'll leave that towards the end about things. So next slide, please. So 4 key areas of discussion. and to give me a chance to use more slides from the standard slide set. The IETF hotels are one roof model, the lounge, the terminal room, and ad hoc space, internet filtering, and then known versus venues versus good venues. The last one being more of a general point of information, that something for you to think about rather than us asking any specific questions. Next slide, please. Well, can you hear me all right? Yeah, no, I'll keep it on then, that's fine. Otherwise a photo of me with the mask off. Yes, great. As noted, there's a lot more detail in the draft here, okay? But we are recommending in 8718 replacing the requirement for the IETF hotels to be within close proximity with a specific time to walk requirement. We don't mind what that time to walk requirement is. We suggest it should not be any shorter than 5 minutes, otherwise it is basic close proximity. And it should not be longer than 15 minutes because that's generally the basis of a livable city beyond 15 minutes. This is going to help us with the choice of venues, basically. It's going to just make life a little bit easier because we, at the moment, have a concern that people don't like crossing the road or whatever. You know, we just need to be careful about this close proximity one. Secondly, we have a requirement that we need to have 1/3 of the projected attendance have rooms available in the IETF hotels. And we are recommending replacing that with sufficient to meet projected demand. There are some cities where we know that Airbnb is prevalent or equivalents are prevalent. We know people make their own things. There are some cities where we know that many more people are going to want to stay in the IETF hotel, and we would simply rather adjust as per the venue rather than, you know, just aim for this 1/3 at least type thing there. We propose to no longer provide a terminal room and to direct people to the lounge instead. The terminal room isn't actually a requirement of 8718. It's a requirement of my favorite document, the DAO of the IETF, and it includes within it a staffed help desk, which we haven't provided in the terminal room for some time. We provide at the registration desk. It requires wired internet connections, and there's only one person online ever mentioned that they might use such a thing occasionally if they were really stuck, but otherwise it doesn't seem to be a big requirement. And anything else that it provides, the lounge does. And so what we'd like to do is just have a thing called the lounge and be better at guiding people and directing people to that for their needs. And then we'd like to reopen the discussion on internet filtering. I'll talk about that a bit more in a bit because it's a more complex one than that. So that's the basic things of the key recommendations and proposals that come from the draft. And I'm going to talk about those in more detail now. So next slide, please.
Jay, just to say you have 4 people in the queue. Do you want to take questions?
Oh, yeah, sure.
now?
I'm happy to take questions now. Yes,
okay,
please
so
do.
if you're in the queue, please come up to the mic. The first is Joel Halpern.
Thank you, Joel Halpern with Ericsson. I just want to comment on the first bullet. Philosophically, I'm comfortable with what you want to do. In practice, this meeting demonstrates very nicely the problems with that. If we were in Pacifico South, sorry, or even the main Pacifico building, I probably would have no issues at all. The additional distance here has caused me some difficulty. That's personal, that's my problem, not the community's problem. But I note that when it starts raining, as it does intermittently here, it is actually significantly more problematic getting back and forth between here and the Intercontinental or any of the other nearby hotels than it is when it's attached or really nearby. So I'm not sure how to balance that with the reasonable goal that you want a little more room, a little more flexibility. But I think this meeting demonstrates that this can be quite problematic. I have found it very difficult.
Okay, thank you. Before I respond to that, can we move on a slide, please? Because, yeah, So the reason is because that was just meant to be a summary, and then the more in-depth discussion is now on this slide and the slide after. Okay, I'm gonna have to challenge you, Joel. That why do you find a 10-minute walk, possibly having an umbrella, you know, a big hardship? Is there? To me, unless I'm missing something, that's part of an ordinary day. You know, piece of life. It's not something that
you spend a lot of time in London. Yes, you treat rain as normal. I don't have an umbrella with me. And if it's not raining when I walk over, I won't bring an umbrella. I then don't have an umbrella to get back if it's raining. It's just a complication. Now, it's not an impossible complication. I'm not saying it's a killer, but I certainly have found it to be very awkward. I felt I needed to say so.
Okay, thank you. So is your point about this? Yep. Okay. Yeah. Great.
Okay, we move down the queue. Please remember to say your name before you speak as well.
Ian Williams with AWS. Previous slide, specifically on the first point as well. I agree with the consideration of having you know, potentially a meeting area and hotel be close together. I disagree with the verbiage a little bit. Time to walk is not exactly inclusionary, especially of anyone who maybe uses an assistive device. So I might propose changing the verbiage slightly from time to walk to some other kind of verbiage, or giving specific considerations for maybe individuals that use an assistive device. Like as an example, if you had, you know, hotel and meeting space that were close together, you know, walking distance, but you couldn't get there with a wheelchair, it might not be inclusionary.
Okay, I understand the inclusivity points. The specific phrase "time to walk" is reasonably well established in city design and mapping of cities and things. So it should be treated as a term of art there rather than specifically, you know, something that's meant to be exclusive there. But I do understand the point, and we can see how we can adjust that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Mark Nottingham. I did think to myself on Monday afternoon, interesting time for Jay to put this draft up. I hear what you're saying about the distance to the venue, but it's not. I think saying, well, you know, oh, I have to get an umbrella maybe, and you know, it's 10 minutes to get to work. It's not like going to work. It's a very different activity. My experience, and I think a lot of people's experience of IETF is, I go to a meeting, then I go back to my room to do some work, and then I go to another meeting, and then maybe I go back to recharge. Especially, you know, introverts need time away from people, and so a normal IETF meeting, and I'll say normal IETF meetings where the hotel is co-located with the venue, allows you to fluidly do that. It also allows you to have, you know, casual, spontaneous meetings in the hotel lobby. There's a central place to do that, and this meeting was definitely different in that respect. It's okay, get up, walk 10 minutes, go to a meeting. Am I staying here for the day or not? If I go back, when do I have to come back? Oh, look at my watch. Oh, I can't make lunch, that sort of thing. It is a qualitatively different thing. And I'm going to push back on your previous response. This is an accessibility issue. It is not, we're not designing cities in this organization. So, but we do need to make our organization accessible. So I don't think we should use that rubric to judge how people get to the meeting.
No. My previous point was about the use of that phrase as a term of art, not that.
Right, but the art is not applicable here. We're not designing cities.
I'm not sure I fully understand, but okay.
Overall, though, beyond that, I think I support most of these in the previous slide, these measures. I think this is a good activity for us to be undergoing. I especially wonder regarding the network, whether we should be thinking bigger. You know, looking at our budget, our network is a pretty huge chunk of the meeting cost. I think that the world has moved on from the 90s and earlier when, you know, good networks were really hard to find. And I wonder whether we need to be spending that money still.
Okay, great. As I said, this is just a summary. We've got more slides about the bits that come on to give more detail to help others with the conversation.
Sorry, can you get closer to the mic? It is hard to hear you.
Yeah, sure.
Hi, this is Pete Resnick. Just on the close proximity, a couple of questions first. One is, the current document simply says close proximity.
Yes.
But does not define what that means. You seem to want a finer definition?
I imagine that nobody would agree that close proximity means 10 minutes walk, certainly from what I've heard so far. So I don't want a finer definition. I want a broader, I want a,
Okay.
well, a more specific definition that is broader than close proximity.
And I just looked at it, but my brain is that bad. The one roof is currently in the, we prefer that, but it's not
Yes.
a requirement. Close proximity
Absolutely, yes.
is
Yeah.
the requirement.
Can we move forward a slide, please? Yeah. Thank you, Martin.
Close proximity.
So
yeah.
at the bottom point, something of a preference.
Because I'm not completely convinced that when we wrote it, close proximity excluded the possibility of some reasonable amount of walking, perhaps over 5 minutes. But if that needs clarification for you to feel comfortable going over 5 minutes walk, that might be reasonable. But I think one of the things that you're hearing is that preference for one roofism is a pretty strong preference.
Yes.
And I tend to agree with everybody else. I have never liked this facility for the reason of having to walk. Having to go to north is even worse than it used to be, but it's not a complete showstopper. There are some places where it would be more convenient to have it in a particular city, and I'm willing to put up with this arrangement once in a while, but this is not great. But that to me shouldn't be encoded in the policy beyond really, we would prefer one roof. That would be our recommendation, and if we have to do this once in a while, so be it. But I'm worried about 5 to 15 minutes simply because it seems to over-specify. If there were words that would make you feel more comfortable, that would give you a little more leeway, that would be preferable.
Great. So one thing I do want to just ask about, though, and challenge on that, is whether or not we actually have a set of communities here within the IETF, whether we have a core community that stays within the IETF hotel, that that expects that very close proximity, and that we have a distinct separate community that sits further out and is more comfortable with those things, and whether we actually have an overlap between that first community and those that are, you know, basically in this room and willing to talk about it or stuff, and whether or not we can see the broader picture or not. Now, I don't know because I don't have the data about it, but I have a suspicion about that. So just, you know, a question to ask, really. But Bob.
Hi, I'm Bob Hinden. So I strongly object to changing the close proximity. I think that's, as several people have said, that's worked out very well. I've always liked it. But I did always have control. I didn't have to stay in the meeting in the main hotel. I could always stay somewhere else. People have that control. So I don't think we should be changing that. If we do, we need to provide a lot more information. Like I was very surprised after I registered and booked my hotel to discover it was going to be a 15-minute walk. It wasn't on the website. It wasn't well communicated, except for there was an email that Alexa sent, which I didn't notice until way later. So you didn't meet the policy for this meeting, and you didn't tell us ahead of time that you weren't going to do it.
That's
this
true.
was very different. And so that, I don't understand why why wasn't this communicated to the community that you didn't meet the requirement? If I had known, I might have considered booking a different hotel, but I didn't know that it was going to be an issue, because the last time we were here, you could go from the Intercontinental to the side door and you're in the meeting venue. That was close proximity. That's what I was expecting when I booked the hotel. Not here. I mean, these meeting rooms are very nice. I don't actually, well, I'm going to try not to vent about everything, but there's very little space to sit down and talk to people here except for one room, which I also don't understand why there aren't chairs in all the lobbies to sit down in.
So,
but that's a different issue. But I strongly object to changing the close proximity.
Okay, thank you, Bob. So,
about to say.
Sorry.
Sorry.
After Mark.
Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah.
I just want to remind that we are trying to dispatch the work. So
Yeah.
whilst we may all have a view on
Right.
many of the aspects being presented here, unless it's a clarifying question that will help you answer the dispatch question, can we try to not bring it to the mic at this present moment? Okay, thank you.
I have a couple of comments. One of them is that things grow out of history. And over 20 years ago, we had an IETF in Vienna where you had to ride the subway to get to the hotel. Okay, so I mean, and the community responded with, we want to be in close proximity. And that doesn't mean no convention centers. But here, for me, this is close proximity, even though it's a bit of a walk, because I feel very comfortable walking back and forth even when it's dark. In other cities, 1 block away would not be close proximity because I need to find someone to walk with me because I don't feel comfortable walking after dark. So there's a lot of considerations about what constitutes close proximity that aren't how long the walk is.
Okay, thank you, Margaret.
Okay.
So,
Yeah, sorry, there are still 3 more people in the queue.
okay.
Just
What I'm wondering, sorry, I think we've started taking the comments prematurely because we haven't done the other slide that is explaining why we want to make this change. And I think perhaps it'd be better if we actually go, on an issue by issue basis, do the slides and then do the questions about that specific issue. Is that okay, Mark?
I just wanted to answer your question before we lost state. You asked a question a little while ago.
Right.
You asked about whether there were different communities who stayed close or far. Anecdotally, I have in the past chosen to stay far away from the venue and walk in because I wanted some space from you lovely people. But that was a choice. And even when I did that, I still had value from having a central kind of under one roof. There's more spontaneous interaction than people tend to hang around more than they do out here.
Okay, great. Thank you. So I'm going to just whip through a bit and then we'll get back to the questions on this one, okay, and then the others. So next slide. So sorry. So this is the current policy we discussed. Yep. So here are the practical concerns. Sorry, yeah, forward please, Martin. Thank you. So it excludes a number of type of venues, largely. It excludes the one roof venues with sufficient meeting space but insufficient rooms, and venues with suitable meeting space and a choice of nearby hotels, but no single hotel is big enough, to accommodate us to meet our things. The large room block strategy, that is booking large room blocks, is losing appeal. Hotels are wary of this. They want deposits and guarantees, and then we there take a significant financial risk, and they're not providing us good pricing at all anymore. As you know, the Intercontinental here, you're not getting at a better price than ordinarily. It was their view that it would be cherry blossom season, that they would be overwhelmed with people, and I think they made a tactical mistake, but that's theirs. And then clearly, well, we believe, and I know Mark has a different view, but we'll talk about this, that we need to continue with the IETF network and IETF hotels, but we've rarely put it into more than one. And we don't really understand what feature of the network is critical and why we need to do that. So we're proposing more work on that. So next slide, please. So just a summary of the requirements, the recommendations here is replace the close proximity with a time to walk. Replace the requirements of the total room block, and then propose that the NOC monitor the usage of the IETF network in the IETF hotels to understand it better, and then provide us data for a review of the hotel network. So that's that part there. So anyone else in the queue who wants to talk further about this, or shall we move on to the next point? Okay, on to the next slide, please. So the lounge, the terminal room, and ad hoc space. So this is what the current policy is, that we have sufficient space for people to hold ad hoc conversations and group discussions, that at least the one IETF hotel or facility has space for a lounge, and then we have this thing called the terminal room at the bottom. Next slide, please. So we are proposing no longer having a separate terminal room, direct people to the lounge instead. Sorry, that should say lounge, not code lounge. Both have low usage and similar uses, that we drop the in-person help desk technical support is still available. We still have people on site who can provide support, and that we don't provide a printer anymore. You know, that has gone largely. People have apps on phones now. And that some things that there are rated actions that we're going to do anyway that are important to have in mind here, that where the opportunity arises us to provide greater ad hoc space, which generally means us renting the furniture. So for example, here, if we were allowed to, we would have to rent the furniture in, have somebody set it up out, you know, in the corridors out there, monitor it, and then take it down and take it away. But we will look at that. We will experiment with the location of the lounge and possibly the layout of the lounge, and improve the messaging and signage around the lounge. You know, whatever, arrows on the floor. If you want to have an ad hoc conversation, go this way. This is the place to do it. So those are things about the lounge, the terminal rooms, and ad hoc space. Anybody like to talk about that one? Is in the queue?
This is Barry Leva. It's not about this in particular. I've certainly heard enough at this point to say this needs a working group, because the discussion we've had has been so wide-ranging that I don't think AD sponsored would do this. So that's my dispatch comment.
Thank you.
Okay, John Clenson, you're next in the queue.
Agree with Barry, and I'd encourage this process in the working group to think about things which are occasionally necessary, even if demand is not high. To say we don't need printers anymore because they're mostly used for boarding passes is a non sequitur in a way, because sometimes printers are needed for other things. They may not be needed very often, but unless there's a plan for arranging printing, it's a problem. And that suggests another piece of the dispatch question, which is, it feels to me that this has not been adequately thought out relative to the needs of people in the community who attend meetings, sometimes chair meetings, and need these sorts of things to organize themselves and others, even if it's not frequent. Thank you.
This is Pete Resnick. So I'm not sure this needs a working group yet. It might, but part of the reason I'm not sure is there are a bunch of things here that I haven't quite sorted. So for instance, the terminal room issue is not in the document that you all are required to follow.
Yep.
That can be handled by, you make an announcement to the mailing list saying, we hereby suggest, and you collect comments, and,
Yes.
and that's fine. The, you know, walking distance one, I personally think should be dispatched to dev null and be done with it. I don't think that's a good change. So I think we need to sort this list first and see how many items there actually are that need to be worked on actively. I think we might end up with a couple of items in the list that need a round of review by the community and an update to 8178. 8178? I think that's
8718.
8718. But I'm not convinced yet.
Okay, thank you. Next slide, please. So internet filtering. This is the current policy that meeting attendees need unfiltered access to the general internet. And that needs to be in the facility and the hotels, including the overflow hotels. That's the particular bit here. In some cases, there is this second statement. In some cases, local laws may require filtering. We seek to avoid these without reducing the pool of cities. This is the as much use, you know, as a wet bus ticket clause. Thank you very much. And then there is the one about it must be possible to provision internet access to the facility and IETF hotels, and the provisions include, and then go further into effectively filtering. So next slide, please. So the problems we have with this are whether or not there is any form of baseline acceptable filtering. So if we take a country I'm familiar with, New Zealand, New Zealand has mandatory internet filtering, which means that you have BGP level redirection for ISPs of a small number of websites that they go through, and there is then whatever attempt is made to look inside to see whether somebody's trying to access child sexual abuse material, and they are then redirected off and told, no, you're not allowed to go there. I don't know whether or not that excludes that entire country as a result. Okay, so from speaking to one or two people who have strong views on this, their view was no, that's fine, that one, but it's not very clear in the policy. A question that's put to us is, does it matter what goes on in the local network if you can legally, technically, and practically bypass all of that through the use of VPNs and other technologies such as mask and encrypted DNS? We have historically met in venues where unfiltered access was provided to the meeting space and the IETF hotels, but not to overflow hotels, which is in contradiction of RFC 8718. But is that acceptable going forward? And it does appear from talking to people as though that would be. That's the question. And then there's much text in the RFC about the importance of people being able to work in bars and cafes, etc. Yet that's not considered when filtering is discussed. So these are some problems we have, two of which are directly related, directly problematic, and two of which are sort of taking a bit further about understanding internet filtering within the venue selection. And all we're asking for here is some clarification. We're not making any proposals about this at all. Okay, move on then, please. And move on, next one. Thank you. So this is simply just to make it clear that there is a trade-off between revisiting known good venues and going to new venues. And these are the advantages and disadvantages of revisiting known good venues. We're going to continue to balance these as we feel it is appropriate, but I wanted to be transparent about this and clear about this, because people ask us, for example, why don't you go back to certain city? And our view is, well, it's got too expensive and nobody would want to sponsor it again. And so that's why we don't. And I just want to make sure that people understand this. And if the community has a different view about this or different guidelines it wants to set about trying to minimize visa issues that people have or trying to maximize the ability for new local people to come, then this is an opportunity to tell us. But otherwise, there's nothing that needs to be done there. And someone in the queue.
Ian Williams with AWS. I just wanted a quick clarifying question. Does venue here define the physical space, such as Pacifico North and the Intercon, or does it define the city and or locale? Okay.
City generally, yeah.
I wasn't getting that from the slide.
Yeah, the RFC uses that terminology in that way, and it deliberately goes across the two, just to but facility is generally what we mean when we mean the actual space. Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay, thank you.
Hi, Bob Hinton. I'm fine with you guys using your judgment based on location and cost. If, for example, if I never have to go to the Prague Hilton again, I will be just fine. I've been there way too many times already. So, if you can't get good rates there, then let's not go back.
And a view on the dispatch question, Bob?
Dispatch.
Any view on the dispatch question, how you'd like to see this being worked on?
Well, I think this sort of falls within the prerogative of the LOC just to exercise good judgment. I'm sort of not quite the close proximity thing is, I think that's the big one about the community. I'm not quite sure what the right answer is yet, but that's why I'm here to listen.
Thank you.
Wes Rudiger, I more have a clarifying question with respect to the global hosts not wanting to sponsor. That surprises me. That's actually a stated case that they want to sponsor events only in new locations.
No, but they don't necessarily see the value in sponsoring in the same location repeatedly.
Okay. As far as dispatch goes, there are really two choices. I agree. I think, we need to give the executive staff some leeway in terms of making intelligent decisions and recognize nobody's going to be happy with any of them. At the same time, I think if the community wants to have a lot of input on all of these subjects, speaking dispatch of the whole thing, we're already having a very lengthy discussion, and it seems like we need a dedicated forum for doing that. And I will say, I will add to the end of that, unfortunately.
Sure. It's one of the early slides, number 4.
Jay, do you want to?
And as is clear, number 3 we can do simply with a consultation. This is our proposal, and that's that. The others are recommendations to the community. Number 3 is a proposal.
So, Mark Nottingham, I think I've solidified my feelings about the dispatch question. I feel like if we created a working group here, it would be an absolute bun fight. And there'd be a lot of feelings. And I'd be concerned that we would come up with an unworkable result, because at the end of the day, we have to pay people money to give us space. And if our requirements are unreasonable, it's not going to happen. So I would, in my mind, I'd address this by you, Jay, in concert with others, come to the community with proposals, have a dialogue, create a draft with the minimal changes necessary, because as we've heard, a lot of these things don't necessarily require changes to RFCs, and shop those around. And when you think that it's viable, take it to AD sponsored, go through last call, get the community stamp on that, weather those couple of weeks, and we're done. I feel like a working group would never terminate, and it would be awful.
Thank you, Mark. So one of the concerns we have is about the appropriateness of the LLC writing an 8718 bis and proposing that to the community, when that is the community document that tells the LLC how to do things.
So maybe you need a few volunteers to act as a go-between there.
Mark, one question. Sorry, one question to you. Where would you suggest the document to be discussed?
It's a good question. Yeah, and the last call is the ultimate discussion. I think there's an informal lead up, and there's a question of, I wouldn't do that on IETF at IETF, because you know how I feel about that list. Sorry? Sure, admin discuss would be great. And let, people who feel they have a stake in it, give their contributions there, and then go do the hard part in the formal last call.
So, sorry, this is Sean Turner. On the point of affiliation, where we have, right now, Jay, we have both of us as the IETF LLC. I could just come on as my company name. And I mean, I am part of the community. I'm on the LLC board, but it won't be forever. I don't know, maybe that kind of solves that particular problem. Thanks. Thank you, Mark.
Margaret Cullen. I absolutely don't think we should have a working group on this topic. I love the IETF, and I also am painting myself when I state this, but we're engineers and we over-engineer every freaking thing. And we do not need to tell professional meeting planners how to plan a meeting. We tried to tell them what we wanted in general terms, and we over-engineered it. And I think, you should help us step away from that, but that we should not make another working group, because all we will do is over-engineer it more.
Hi, Lars Eggert. As somebody with a lot of dots here, I have a question to the community. So if anything here ends up being AD sponsored, would I be an appropriate AD to sponsors, given that I'm also on the LLC, or should I find somebody else on the ISG? I don't need answers now. Just send me email. I just if we can shortcut that discussion, I already know what you guys want. If something comes to AD sponsored, I know what to do. Thank you.
Rich Sauls. Okay. I think the key takeaway so far, not to usurp the chair's role, but to usurp them, is that there are different dispatches for these 4 questions. and then I don't think we have a really good, strong agreement on putting all of them in one area.
Pete Resnick, willing to answer Lars's question right now, which is, I think your role on the LLC is representative of the technical community on the LLC board. To a certain extent, I understand the fiduciary realities of that, but I think we expect you to be there to have that kind of input. So I don't think it would be a problem for you to sponsor the document internal to us. And I want to, amplify what Mark said. Doing this on admin discuss and then last call would be fine. I think Rich's concern can be addressed by simply walking through the issues on admin discuss, ditching the ones we say, nope, we're not doing that, bringing up the ones we think are good. I'm okay with Sean holding the pen, but I'm sure that we can find one or two people to hold the pen. I think it is overall appropriate for the LLC to give feedback to the community about what that document says on a regular basis. Yes, I agree there's something funky about you holding the pen on an update, but giving that input is absolutely essential and should be done on a regular basis.
Pete, are you volunteering to help hold a pen?
Hell no.
Okay, well, if anyone would like to volunteer, I think just to summarize where we are at this stage, it seems like I'm not seeing a riot forming for Lars being an AD, but if you being an AD who's sponsoring the draft, given his role on the LLC, but views on that would be gratefully received. And it sounds like we're not thinking a working group because it would take too long and it would be the result would be maybe unworkable. But there is a need to share discussion and distill these points down and make sure you get adequate community input, possibly via mailing lists, and just making sure that it gets enough discussion. That's where I see it right now. So please endorse or disagree with that view as we use the rest of this time. Okay, up next.
Joel Halpern with Ericsson again. I'm sorry, Kirsty, I must somewhat disagree with your analysis.
Please do.
And I do think some of these items may be able to be handled by other means. Some of them probably don't require as much, but the contention and community impact of some of these and the need for balancing many interests, the only tool we have that is effective is a working group. And in particular, using admin discuss, for which you, Jay, do your dang best to run fairly, is just an awkward place to run a discussion where the LLC is really trying to get not the LLC's view, but, and you honestly aren't, you're trying to get the community's view. So I fear that we're going to need, even when we take it apart and get rid of the pieces that don't need detailed handling, we're going to need a working group, which is unfortunate. If I thought we could just resolve it with AD sponsored, I don't care which AD sponsors it. That's not the big deal. But some of the discussions I've heard and some of the disagreements I've heard about some of these issues, yeah, we over-engineer. I can't disagree with Margaret about that. But on the other hand, we really need the community to be comfortable with these answers, because this is really direct effect on our ability to get things done.
Joel, just quickly, sorry, while you're at the mic, would a mailing list created just for this topic, would that provide an adequate forum for discussion?
Maybe, I mean, maybe an email list with a suitable moderator clearly identified, because I've watched the problem when we have mailing lists and we don't know who's running it. Maybe that would take care of it, because I'm big on we should be getting stuff done by email. So maybe we don't need a strict, formal, full working group, but we need a clear venue and a clear discussion and clear ability to reach resolution on what does the community want.
Thank you.
Bob Hinton again. So I think these are not all equivalent in how we handle them. I think the big ones are 1 and 4. Well, 1, as several people have said, I think you should just delete that one, and then it'll make all of this much simpler. But that clearly, I think, needs a very broad community thing, because the close proximity thing was not something arbitrary or over engineering. It was because of our experience in having a lot of meetings, and that was something that made everyone more productive. So it's there for a reason. It's not just to make the LLC's job harder. But I understand why that probably is. Number 2 and number 4, I mean, it took me a while to figure out we had a terminal room, and I don't think many people use that now that wireless is so ubiquitous. Whether it's 1/3 or some plus or minus number for number 2, I think that's just communicate what you're doing. I don't think that requires a lot of community stuff. Number 4, I think, has a bunch of stuff inside it. It's not just an issue of filtering. It's whether you have IPv4 and IPv6 service, whether those are available in the meeting. I think it's a separate, we haven't always had IPv6 in hotels. I don't think that's a giant problem. Whether we still need an IETF network in hotels, I'm not, it could go either way. I think it's nice, but it's a very consistent service. But for the meeting itself, I think we need pretty unfiltered. I don't know what limited filtering means, but we clearly need V4 and V6 service. If this means we're only doing IPv4, then that's completely not acceptable. So I think number 1 and number 4 require broad community discussion. Number 2 and 3, I think, can be handled differently.
Thank you.
Hey, Jason Livingood, just a comment from the standpoint of my personal experience on the LLC board. I think 1 and 2 are very closely related in my view, and it would be helpful whenever this work progresses to share the data behind what's driving that. A lot of people may believe, if asked, oh, everybody wants to be in close proximity under a single roof. But when you look at the actual data of when you have a hotel that's under that roof and a variety of other hotels, what we're finding over time, I believe, and the data will show this and help, is that people are migrating away from that closest hotel to others that may offer lower cost, to other Airbnbs and so on. So, I don't know if that's different types of participants over different times having different requirements, but it would be great to share data when those discussions happen so that folks can see the drivers behind that and the associated costs to some of those things, because I think the data is always better to inform the discussion. Thanks.
Jason, just quickly, do you have a view on the dispatch question?
Oh, yeah, please not a working group. Yeah, I left Margaret's point. I think it's spot on.
Okay, great. We're going to look at closing the queue out soon so we can wrap this up. Barry, you're next.
This is Barry Leba. I'm puzzled by the idea of we don't need a full-blown working group and that sort of thing. What working groups give us is somebody delegated to judging consensus and moderating the discussion, and a charter that scopes the work. And I think we need that for this. I don't want to put it on Lars or some other AD to be responsible for taking all of that stuff. A working group does not have to be a high overhead thing, but it gives a specific parameters to a discussion. And I think that's important, judging from what's been happening today now. So.
Mark Nottingham, just to answer Barry, I think the difference is that I fear some people will come to a working group with the idea that they can, that the community consensus defines reality, that they can get whatever they want, even if it's a pony. And there's a reality here, which is, not controlled by the working group. And frankly, there's little expertise, as Margaret was saying. So I have big doubts about that. But I got up to just ask Jay and maybe the chairs, would it be useful to do a hum on each of these 4 as written so you can get a sense of how the room feels? Yes, no, don't know. The chairs were talking, I think.
Sorry, we were just debriefing. It would be sensible to break up these proposals, these different 1, 2, 3, 4s, and get some clarification on where each of them should go.
No, I asked, would it be useful to get a hum to see how the room feels about each of them?
Okay. We could. Yeah, I know. I'm thinking, well, I think we'll do a raise hands to include people virtually. This might be a good time to remind people, if you've not joined and you're in the room, you need to join using the on-site Meet Echo tool. You can scan the QR code in the corner. So I'll just give people a moment to do that. And then I think taking a measure would be a really helpful thing to do.
And just a note, as Jason pointed out, the 1 and 2 are quite linked, but we don't need to do anything different when it comes to the show of hands. But there's a degree to which, well, one affects the other, but I won't go into details now.
Yeah. Stephen, did you have a question on the raise hand?
I thought the queue was closed. Stephen Farrell, I don't think we should be humming on these. I thought we were supposed to be dispatching as opposed to debating the merits of 5-minute walks.
It's just to find, try and gauge consensus on where the best options are, or at least rule some out.
In that case, I'll have a snooze for 20 minutes while you figure out the questions.
Okay, should we do it? Okay, so we have started a show of hands. We want to just really check, does this work need a working group? So you raise your hand if you think, yes, it does need a working group. And you do not raise hand if you think it does not need a working group. Hopefully that is very clear. We'll just repeat that. Raise your hand if you think, yes, it needs a working group. Do not raise hand. It does not need a working group. And give that a few more seconds. I'm patient. I'll count to 10 in my head. Okay, right, so let's capture it there. So we have 10 who raised a hand saying it needs a working group, but 37 who say it does not need a working group. So we can rule out that working group option going forward. What we were discussing was separating these 1, 2, 3, and 4. We've heard from the community that some of them require more discussion than others. So if there is at least one proposal here that you think will be fine to discuss on a mailing list, then we can start from that position and work out from there. We'll just pause and let Lars join the queue.
I just wanted to point out that the last one is not quite like the others, because there actually the LLC feels very uncomfortable making a proposal, and we would really appreciate if the community got together and told us what you want us to do here.
Okay, do I need to show hands on? Hold on. Margaret, you're in the queue.
It's quite common for us to poll the community about things. Is that last one something that we could start with polling the community about? What, you know, what levels would be okay and would not be okay? And then if we, you know, get a firestorm and no real consensus, we'll have to figure out where to go from there. But maybe the community would surprise us and actually have some consensus on this.
So we did consider that, Margaret. I think the problem is that in order to do that, we would have to give specific examples. Specific examples would be country-based, and we then run the risk of national bias in the way that those answers are done. So the preference is if we can get, some form of guidance that avoids that.
Well, I mean, any sort of guidance is going to have to say something, right? I mean, and it will end up resulting in some national bias, potentially, right? But, you know, I don't think there's probably anybody who's like, we absolutely cannot have any filtering of any kind, but when you get to, is it okay if we don't have IPv6? I think you're going to get the community saying no, okay? If you say, is it okay if the government filters out all sites it considers to have anti-country propaganda, I think people are going to say no, right? I mean, you know, what levels, I don't even have the expertise to know what levels of filtering we're talking about. And I think someone's going to figure out, you know, what that is and ask us questions about which one would be acceptable, because otherwise the answer you're going to get is no filtering. And that's not actually mean, every network is filtered in some way, pretty much.
So my view would be that any such poll or any such working out will be best done by the community. So
yeah, Lars, I get what Jay said. Also, let's take the V4, V6 thing out of this, right? Because we're talking about filtering that is instituted for content filtering, and nobody's like for filtering V6 at the country level, as far as I know, but letting V4 through, or vice versa, right? So I think we can, if we can make a statement that assumes that we are going to try and have V4 and V6 available, I think that would move us forward. But it's really sort of the questions you raised are all valid, right? But and polling the community, maybe we'll turn it around and say if people would propose, community members would propose a policy to the community, and we see what the reaction is, that might move it forward. Right? So write a paragraph of text, and see if there's some consensus. I think that might be helpful. And one of the reasons why the LLC is raising it is we're not actually clear that there aren't any community members that will say no filtering, no, any filtering is unacceptable, right? Because we really don't know.
Okay, so in the interest of finishing this session on time, we just do hear very quickly from John Levine, and then we'll do one more show of hands to determine the way forward.
Yeah, actually, I have to agree with Margaret and disagree with Jay here. I think I know that I don't really have a very good idea of what sort of filtering we're going to run into in countries outside of the handful where I have been. So I think before we can move this forward, I think we need to have a better idea of what sort of filtering we realistically are likely to run into. You know, DNS filtering, BGP filtering.
Yeah.
You know,
so if we
handful, you know, like the British thing, and I would like it would be nice if we could do it in ways that blinded the country, but I think if we can't, we just have to. I think we're going to have to come up with some concrete examples so that people can say something more sensible than no filtering is bad.
Yeah. Okay. So in terms of having a dedicated forum for discussion around many of these topics, I'll just start the final show of hands for this area, which is I've heard from the community that there's a need for a separate dedicated space to have these discussions. So the proposal is to create a separate mailing list for this initial discussion and proposals, possibly with the follow-on then of sharing in a more wider community, discuss an IETF, but at least initially as the next step to create a separate mailing list for this discussion and proposals. So if you think that is a good idea, yes, we should have a separate mailing list, then you raise your hand. If you think no, that is a terrible idea, then you do not raise hand. Yeah, if you don't care, don't vote. Just give that a few more seconds, but it seems pretty landed on the side that it would be a good thing to go forward and create a separate mailing list for this initial discussion and proposal. Okay, so to wrap up this, and sorry for anyone who's joined the queue, we've closed the queue just in the interest of time. I think the takeaway, Jay, that we've read from the lively chat, the discussion in the room, and a few other various things going left and right, that these 4 points need to be more clearly defined and structured with a range of proposals concretely proposed. We'll create a separate mailing list for that initial discussion, and we'll share it on GenDispatch.
Great. So just one thing, I'm going to take 3 out of that and just do that as a proposal to the community. And so it's 1, 2, and 4 that we'll go with that process with, because I heard from a number of people that we could just go ahead with 3 as a proposal. It's not, because it's not documented in the same way as the others.
Yeah, I think there was some chat on Jabber about if it's not used often, some people do like the use, so just checking that with the community.
Yeah,
just a clarification. You know, if that process ensues and it turns out that yes, a document update is needed, is the presumption after this discussion that AD sponsored is appropriate, or which is how I read it, or does that need to come back to GenDispatch or another, you know, venue?
I think it's clear we've heard that the community needs to give enough input on the proposals. So if that can be achieved via mailing lists, then that would be one way. Coming back to GenDispatch would be another way. So I think it's probably wise to just see how it progresses and perhaps provide an update back to GenDispatch on how it's going in future, making sure that this community, either on the mailing list or in a meeting, to make sure the community does get sufficient visibility. So going forward, we can kind of leave that maybe just open for the moment. Okay. All right. Well, thank you very much, Jay. Thank
Thank you,
you
Jess.
for the input from the community. Sorry, that was quite a tricky one to start us off. Just a reminder, please do sign in using the on-site tool if you're in the room so that we make sure we know you were here, and do head over to the minutes as well to take notes. So up next we have Rich presenting on re-examining the IESG and IAB.
And you thought Jay's issue was hard. Okay. Rich Saul's outgoing NomCom, thank you, thankfully, Chair. In the US, we talk about radicalization, right, social media. You can also be radicalized by being on NomCom. Next slide, please. So I have a couple of slides that motivate what I want, or what I hope the community will, well, what I want and what I'm asking for. It'll be at the end. Hopefully we can just skip, can agree to these slides and not to have many questions until we get to the dispatch question. The problem statement, as most people see it, is that too often an AD position is uncontested. It's well-known public impact, right? You can look at any NomCom page, public page, and see the people who have been, nominated, who have been nominated and accepted the nomination and then started to fill out the questionnaires. That's the public impact. That's public information. The general consensus among anyone who's done it or has been close to it is that the AD job is essentially full-time. Personally, I have a real problem with that. If it's full, well, no, take it back. The AD job is essentially full-time. Okay, I accept that. The second item is that it takes 2 terms to really do the job well. And that's where I have an issue. Almost every AD says, oh yeah, I didn't really get it, the swing of it until until my second term. It's very rare to have an AD who does only 1 term. We all have, for the most part, full-time jobs. I'd be fired if it took me 2 years to learn how to write code or something, right? So I think that's those 2 factors in together are a problem. Yeah, Colin.
Colin Jane, I just have a clarifying question. How long did it take you to write code? Because it totally took me about 10 years to be pretty good at it.
Well,
right?
okay.
That's my point, is this is a highly specialized job. You are fundamentally the world expert on a given area of topics.
Well,
I don't think we should
yeah.
assume that we can hire somebody off the street and they're going to be able to do this job having never done any IETF work before.
I didn't say, well, but very few ADs have come in never doing any IETF work before.
Agreed. I just think that we need to realize these are highly specialized experts. That's all my
Can we just, before the queue explodes, please keep your view focused on any clarification needed to answer a dispatch question. Okay, so any opinions on these problem statements, if you think they need discussion, that would indicate something. Yes. Okay, Miria.
Mia Kuleman, I think this is just not correct what's on the slide.
Okay.
So we have a lot of ADs who are not full-time. It wouldn't work if everybody would not be full-time, I guess, but I actually don't know for sure. So
Sure.
like that point isn't correct. And the other one is, I think also the point about it takes 2 years to learn the job is wrong, but like you optimize, right? You be much more efficient after a while. So it does make sense to stay on for another term.
All right, fine.
I'm afraid I'm just going to pile on here. I mean, I think you're right about this thing being uncontested, the job is being undesirable at some level. But, like I knew lots of people did this part-time and I did it part-time and I felt like I don't think I was only competent at doing it after like 19 months. So, so I think, I think this first point is right, but I'm not sure your diagnosis is right.
Thank you.
20 years ago, we wrote a document called the Problem Statement Document. It's RFC 3774. It brought up exactly these same issues. At the time, a lot of things were done to try to fix problems, and it had brought up some other issues as well. The solution we had to this was eventually, after a bunch of community discussion, to create what eventually was called the IAOC and hire Jay, basically, and I mean, it was someone else at the time. But now I'm hearing from people that the IETF LLC doesn't want to decide things, and that stuff like the masking policy for the IETF is being decided by the ISG. And we tried to take a whole bunch of stuff off the ISG's plate, and somehow it slunk back on to the ISG's plate. And I don't know what happened exactly. It also didn't eliminate the problem. We took some stuff off of the ISG's plate, I think, for a while, but we still have the problem that just the job of running the working groups, managing all the chairs, reading all the documents, approving all the documents, the basic functions of the ISG is just a ton of work for that number of people. But the problem is that I don't know what to do about this, because I don't think we need to write another problem statement. We already have one. Section 2.6.2 covers the workload of the ISG and a lot of the things that they did at that time, which they still do, which is not reasonable to expect. At that time, I think it was 12 or 13, and now it's 15 people to do on behalf of the entire organization. So I don't think we need to define the problem again. I think we need to try to figure out how to solve it.
Yes, I agree with you. And this is just background for those who weren't around 20 years ago, myself included. Somebody.
Please make sure you keep to the dispatch questions.
Wes Herdeker,
As much as possible.
Wes Herdeker, ISI. So I'm going to treat this dispatch question as if you're almost running a BOF, right? And so is the problem well formed? Yeah, we know the problem, right? Margaret just talked about that. Is the IETF the right place to solve it? Absolutely. Where else would it be? Do you even have a sense of a starting solution? And it, and I said this in a different BOF the other day, right? There's very few BOFs that are successful if you don't at least have a clue where you're going, and you don't at this point. And it's not your fault, Rich. It's the IETF's fault. And until we can get like some solid ideas in the community to build up a solid proposal, my consensus at this point is no dispatch. There's nowhere for it to go.
Well, I have 6 or 7 ideas that a BOF or a working group could talk about. No, I didn't, because that's not appropriate for this section.
Joel Halpern from Ericsson. I went and looked at the rest of your slides to try to do you the courtesy of, you went to the trouble of preparing a whole message and we're stalling you on the first slide. So I went and looked at the rest to see if I could see a place this could go that made sense to me. Yeah, there are problems, but in fact, the headline you started with was the job description of the AD. As far as I can tell, that's not the problem that you want to address that you describe on your slides. I am left with, no, I can't dispatch this proposal anywhere because I don't see a proposal I can understand about what the somewhere would do and how that would result in things. You have a slide that says, get some measurements. We have lots of measurements.
No.
We don't need to get more measurements. I'm left, unfortunately, I'd love to make it work better. I've seen lots of proposals over the years to make it work better, most of which I concluded would actually be counterproductive, but they're entitled to make proposals. Lots of people have. I have to end up with dispatch this to Dev Null, with all due respect to the fact that it's very frustrating for the NOMCOM when 6 of your 7 slots are one person. I get that. Been there.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks, Joel. Can I suggest we maybe let Rich present the whole thing, and then we can decide if it's worth dispatching or not. It's very hard on a partial presentation, particularly when we're just reading slides and not listening to what Rich might say. So I would advise we just kind of go through the rest of the slides, give Rich the courtesy. There's only 6 of them. We're on slide 2.
Right.
Okay, thank you.
Next slide, please. So I think that's actually not the real problem, what we all talked about. I think the real problem is that if we accept that the AD job or any of the IETF leadership takes 4 years and it's almost a full-time job for most people, the talent pool from which we can draw is severely limited. I've been told personally by a member of one of the global hosts, who, they're willing to pay lots of money to have the, help sponsor IETF meetings. They're not going to let their engineers become ADs. Okay. You can imagine places that are not as affluent as the US and some of the other countries. You know, we're going to have a problem if the only source of ADs is the global Fortune 1000. Next slide, please. Oh, and by the way, this has knockoff problems. The IAB would like members who have wide exposure to various IETF technology. The best way to get that is to be in AD, because you see all of the RFCs and you are exposed to wide areas of IETF technology. The path from IESG to IAB is very well trod. The phrase, right, the IAB is a retirement home for IESG members is a trope, partly because there's a natural progression, or has been a natural progression from IESG to IAB, and then secondarily because the IAB mission is a little not well formed. And you can coast along in the IAB without really being noticed. If you coast along as an AD, it'll be noticed and problematic. Next slide, please. Well, wait, there's more. It's hard to be an AD without a working group chair. Working group chair is like leadership light. It's less work. You get to be pretty influential, and as a result, it's a good justification for business travel and to get to come to the meetings and see your friends and all of that. In terms of the comment I made before about membership, about statistics and numbers, we don't know how long chairs serve. We don't have that membership stored in the data tracker, right? We don't know. You know, the only one in my area, in the area that I focus on, the only one we know is PKICS, which lasted forever. It had many chairs, but we just don't know. ADs can be chairs. ADs cannot be chairs, typo there. IAB members can be chairs. It's just, like I said, it's a good way to focus. So I think we need to look at all of the parties in, I forget the RFC number, the the Internet Standards Process version 3. Next slide, please. So here's my thoughts on the next steps, what I would like to see. We need to get metrics. Who is participating in IETF leadership? How long have they been doing it? How many chairs? You know, I'm curious how many people have multiple chairmanships, right? What are the corporate affiliations? We should work on, I believe we should work on getting new job descriptions for the IESG and the IAB. Again, that's in the RFC about the Internet Standards Process. The practice of term limits. Should it be policy? Should it be practice? You know, in 2119 language, is it a must or a should that you should only serve 2 terms? What I would like to see is a dispatch to a working group forming BOF. And that's
Thank you for your presentation, Rich. So if you'd like to join the queue, then please do. Please give your view on the next steps for this work, which, as a reminder, can be more discussion, can be it should go nowhere, can be a working group, a BOF, etc. Thank you. Pete.
Hi, Pete Resnick. So for a lot of reasons, I disagree with with what other folks have said about what can and can't be done, but I agree with the outcome, at least for the most part. I think trying to do this as a BOF, trying to have an output of a document with either policy or just plain practices is actually the wrong way to approach this. Leadership in this community has shown an ability to be incredibly resistant to attempts to overly define what they are, how they do their job. There are folks who have been on IESGs in the past who have had far less than a full-time job and done it successfully, but that has been their choice and their ability to do that. And there have been people who have done it for more than a full-time job because of their choice and their way of doing it. I think the appropriate way to handle this is actually more on the education team end of the world. There's a lot of good stuff that could be done to help leadership across the board do their jobs better and figure out how to do their jobs better. Doing some metrics is a fine idea. I think that's great. Coming up with trainings for chairs, for ADs, who are notoriously bad at overestimating their abilities to be managers in the way that is really required for the job would be good. Giving those opportunities for things to change is the way to go with this. Trying to come up with new job descriptions is I think just going to be a waste of time in the long run because people won't accept them. That's where I'm at.
Okay.
It's possible, I guess, to interpret what I said earlier as we shouldn't work on this, but I do think we as an organization have to work on this. And I think the things you're pointing out are interesting, that they're still true 20 years later. And that, but I'm not sure that a working group can do anything. The people who have to fix this are the leadership themselves. Okay, if the IAB has kind of a fuzzy thing and you can get away with coasting, that's a problem and the IAB needs to fix that. Okay, if the IASG is actually seriously wants to fix this problem, which it's not clear to me that they do, okay, they need to accept that to run an area and to manage an area, you don't have to be the world's leading technology person on everything covered by that area, okay, that you can delegate things. We worked a lot 20 years ago on delegating things to working group chairs, delegating to document shepherds. The whole document shepherding process was put together back then. The notion that they could delegate reviews to directorates, they could identify the world's leading experts on these things and get them to do the reviews, for instance. And it just doesn't hold because the ISG does not choose to do it. All right. When you try to do that stuff in the ISG, there's a lot of discussion about, well, is that efficient? And, you know, the whole thing is structured so that everybody has to be able to defend every review on a big heated telechat. And if you can't do that because you got an outside expert to do the review, you're not doing your job right. Okay. And so there's a lot of problems, and they're not things. Like currently, we don't have an RFC that contains the ISG job description in any detail, but I don't think that writing one is going to fix anything because the ISG would have to want to fix the problem in order for the problem to get fixed. That's
so
your dispatch
I
view.
wouldn't read, I mean, I was using job description in a loose sense in terms of, I think, community expectations of what we want. And we pride ourselves on being driven bottom up. So if we tell the leadership this is what we want, you know, I think that's a compelling argument. As for in terms of, you know, what the RFC you were mentioning 20 years ago, Google didn't exist 20 years ago, right? Google's not even 15 years old. The internet has changed drastically, and it's only changing faster in, say, even just the past 10 years. So I think mechanisms that worked 10 years ago, or we should revisit them. That's
Okay, but I took from Margaret's view on dispatch that it should be for leadership to take on. Okay. Eric Riscola, you're next in the queue.
Well, I'm not sure how to solve it, but I'm sure that creating a working group will not solve it. So I don't think we dispatch it that way. If I were you, Rich, I would try to narrow, instead of having this sort of like broad brush thing, I would try to narrow down on one specific problem you thought we were trying to solve. And I will give you a suggestion of that, which is the convention that Margaret has indicated that the ADs are individually personally responsible for passing on each and every document, and they should have an opinion on each document and not outsource that. And so the effect of having all these directors is simply been to double the number of reviews rather than to offload the ADs. And so and I think when I was an AD, I felt responsibility to do that. I felt like you were like letting down the side if you didn't like review the document yourself, and like it was, you know, your watch to do it. And so I think if what you want is to make the ED job easier, what you need to do is to have the community demonstrate that they do not think it is the AD's responsibility to be the person standing behind each document. And then the ADs will start to behave differently under those circumstances. But that's like a very narrow thing. And I think that that's not solved by having a working group, that is solved by building consensus in the community. And so I think that this gets dispatched nowhere, but that's what I would do if I were you.
Okay, thank you. Question though, how would the community represent that this is what they want to the ADs within the IETF?
Well, that's a good question. You know, we talked a bunch about how to get community feedback on things. I think you know, if it were me, I would produce a document that attempted to sort of frame up a new model for a new model for this. But I don't think a working groups are very good for this actually, because the working groups have this property that only like the 10 people really care show up. So I would attempt to produce a document and see if I could get support for that, both in the ISG and outside the ISG.
Okay.
Thank you, Stephen Farrell. You're next in the queue.
Right, Stephen Farrell. So I think I kind of agree with Ecker. I think I kind of disagree with some part of what Margaret said. I don't think the IESG, for example, can fix this. I think what I was on, there was attempts, valid attempts were made, and it failed, and for probably good reasons. The fact that you have personnel changing, every year or so is part of it. That you can't kind of plan very well. So I don't think the IESG can solve it by themselves without community help. I think I agree with Ecker that until there's like a sketch or a set of sketches as to where you might land, I don't think it'd be any point in having a working group.
Okay.
Or possibly even a BOF. I mean, we could have a BOF where we all whine at them. That's sure, that'd be good. But like having a working group where all of the ex-IESG and IIB people tell the current ones what they should be doing, meh.
Okay, thank you. And then Lars Eggert, you're next in the queue.
Hi, Lars Eggert. I thought I was out of the queue, but since I'm not, I'll take the opportunity. And not speaking as the AD for Gen, but just as a general person on the ISG. So the ISG is not this like monolithic blob, right? It's a bunch of people and it rotates regularly, right? So since like 20 years ago when that draft got written or that RC got written, we probably have like 100 people that cycled through roughly like that. I don't know, data is good, right? And this is a continuous discussion also in the ISG, right? And it seems like we sort of hit this local optima for how we work under the workload we're under. And it's, it's not good, but it's not terrible. And I don't think there's any easy fixes that we can make here that would make it significantly better that haven't been sort of thought of and didn't work. So if the community has ideas of how to more fundamentally change things here, I think that is really sort of, in my mind, the only way out. Right, and that includes like hypothetically, do we need an ISG or do we do something completely different? But it would require opening 2026. And I think otherwise, right? I mean, it's a valiant effort, and I know where you're coming from, and we've had these discussions also in the ISG, right? Why are there not more candidates and so on? And we've landed on a pattern of work that works pretty well for us. And it causes a bunch of people to not be able to do the job, but it's really hard. And I've seen simple proposals like let's just add more ADs, right? That doesn't scale because then as a chair of the ISG, I don't have 13 people anymore. I have 30, and that's a completely different dynamic, right? And if you take it to the extreme, that means like why don't we put all the working group chairs together and say that's the ISG now, right? Just to illustrate the point. So there's really no easy answers here, and I'm happy to chat about what could be done, but I feel that if there's a solution, it's going to be much more drastic than anything that was proposed.
Okay, thank you. We did actually close the queue, Margaret, sorry, when you joined, just before you joined. So it seems the mood in the room, Rich, is that it's further discussion needed, refining some of these to kind of more concrete proposals and solutions that the community can debate around. I heard some opposition to a working group, but then also the need for a lot of community input. So a BOF might be a good place to kind of distill and discuss some of these themes once refined a bit further.
Okay. Thanks everyone for your time and thoughts.
Thank you, Rich, for your presentation. Okay, so we move on through the agenda. Up next, we have Joel speaking about antitrust guidelines for IETF participants.
I'm Joel Halpern. I hope this will be short. I'm not betting anymore after what I've just seen. This is a document that has already been presented and resolved in GenDispatch, but I was asked to do it again, so I'm doing so. There are only 2 content slides. Second, this is an outline of the document. The document is an informational document. It does not set IETF policy. It describes issues people should be aware of around antitrust. We have done our best to be clear about the issues and what they are and explain them in ways that engineers can understand, because even I have trouble understanding when the lawyers explain this stuff to me, but not get into setting policy. And yeah, it's a little small. I just copied literally the table of contents onto this slide, because whatever we're doing here, we're not reviewing the the content of this. Content discussion is currently, unless the result of this meeting moves it, on antitrust policy at IETF.org, with the intention that if that group, I hope, reaches agreement, the draft will then be AD sponsored. Next page, that's where I'm going. So we've presented the content, we presented how should it be dispatched. There was discussion, there were different people with different views, that's what we expect. We revised the document based on the feedback. Our first version was much too prescriptive and really came off as setting policy. We changed that. The next version still wasn't really clear about, no, this is advice, this is information, this is guidance. So we emphasized it more. Now, that may still need more tuning. The discussion on wherever you tell us to discuss it can tell us that. There are, in fact, a few bullets that I want to discuss more in that context to make sure we get it right. It's an interesting challenge between the advice I've gotten for more than 20 years about certain elements of antitrust policy that we should follow, and the fact that those aren't captured in RFCs, and this draft can't set policy. So we have to work that out. We understand we're not setting policy. The working group discussed how to dispatch it. The chairs watched the discussion and then told us, okay, we will dispatch it to discuss on antitrust policy, AD sponsored by Lars when and if antitrust policy reaches agreement. It seemed to me straightforward. I thought we were done with this part of the effort, but somebody objected. So I was asked to present it again. Does anybody have concerns about that dispatch direction?
We open the floor. Please join the queue. Mark Nottingham, you're first up.
Mark Nottingham. This document's interesting. It's a bit weird in that it's not a policy, but it's not legal advice because you can only get that from a lawyer who represents you. So it's a bit odd. I think that the document does need some more work, as you were saying. I wonder what its effect is going to be in that almost all of the current activity in antitrust is around abuse of dominance, and all the things that we can say are about cartels, which is a completely different branch of antitrust. So I'm not really sure what it's doing.
Well, if I may comment on that, I know of some SDOs which have been or are being investigated and having to spend millions of dollars because of investigations of whether the SDO was engaging in behaviors which the relevant government considered to be subject to and improper under antitrust, anti-competitive legislation. So while there's certain areas that get more focus, we didn't start this because, well, we imagined that somebody somewhere there's real evidence that there are real issues. US DOJ even has some guidance.
Yes.
And one of the points of this document is to comply with that guidance.
Yes, I'm aware of that.
But that's a substance issue.
Yeah. So for the dispatch question, then, I think AD sponsored is fine in that sense, but the AD does need to listen to the consensus of the community that this isn't license.
No, it's not licensed. It's why it's the consent. That's why I've said several times, it's assuming that antitrust policy comes to a conclusion and then last call, IETF last call comes to the conclusion. It's not, well, in fact, I wrote the document that says the IESG with Ecker, that says the IESG can't just go publish stuff just because they want to. So nobody's trying to do that.
Okay, we're just with an eye on the time. We
Yes.
don't need to rehash. I think we've already agreed the work is valuable, et cetera, et cetera. So this is just on if this is an appropriate. I don't mean that to be dismissive at all. We've had those discussions. Yeah. So if we can just focus on this dispatch decision, is this an appropriate dispatch format? Thank you, Alyssa.
Thanks. I'm still parsing what you just said there, because if we're back here again, then aren't we here again to decide? So, but
just the
neither here nor there.
dispatch route, not whether any previous discussion. So as we said, it's just a discussion on if there are further questions on the way this is being dispatched.
Sure. Okay. So yeah, I mean, if we are deciding again, my suggestion would be we dispatch this one to the rubbish bin. But if that's not an option, what I would say about the chosen dispatch route is if this draft is going to be discussed on this mailing list, it would be good to get responses from the authors when comments are made. So I've sent multiple mails about this draft for 6 weeks ago and got nothing back.
I will have to go looking. Sorry.
I'm just saying that if that's the process that was agreed, then like you can't only respond to the supportive feedback, like you have to actually respond to all the feedback.
No,
So
if I missed some of your emails, I will go back and look and make sure we've responded to them.
okay, thanks. But I think that's kind of important for driving this forward.
That's the process. Yeah, we don't get to ignore messages.
Stefan, you're next in the queue, joining virtually. Stefan, if you are speaking, we cannot hear you. We'll just pause and roll on to the next. Oh, hello.
Oh, I'm here. I apologize. Anyway, so first, I strongly suggest to move the document forward and not dispatch it to the dustbin. The reason being that SDOs cannot hide behind the idea that they don't have policies where case law in practice requires the existence of policies nowadays. And antitrust is one of those. So please don't do that. That would be stupid. Really, it would be, I shouldn't say stupid, but it would,
Okay, well, Stefan's just gone offline on the tool. So if you do manage to come back online, we'll take your comment in the queue. If you are making a comment that would be better served, email to the antitrust-policy@IETF.org list, then please consider doing that there instead of right now. Next in the queue, Cullen Jennings.
I'm not sure I agree that we need policy to protect ourselves from the type of things you're worried about here. But if we do need a document to protect ourselves from those, it will have to be policy. So I think doing this as a non-policy document won't work in the slightest for any of the needs, and that we should therefore dispatch it to the dustbin.
Okay, as I said before, I think we've already made the decision.
Jay is asking to
yeah.
respond to that.
Responding as an author, Jay Daly, we took specific legal advice on that, and the response was that while we had a very strong antitrust stance already, because it was distributed across a number of documents, providing a document that explained that would give us an additional, just an additional safeguard. So it doesn't have to introduce anything new. It's just got to be an educational document that puts it all in one place for people.
Well, I don't think that's actually a legal opinion. That may be the opinion of a lawyer, but that doesn't, I'm not sure that moves me in terms of what's helpful for people or not. It's not like a legal question. I guess I've been through this document a couple times. I'm not sure it clarifies more than it obscures. So I think if we actually are redispatching it, I think we should reconsider the decision to send it to a mailing list. I think it probably needs a stronger showing of actual need.
Okay, that's the end of the queue. So we hear from this no strong objections to this being a reasonable forum to having the discussion about this document. All the points raised, opinions and so on, very valid. Please do share them with that email list. And as raised, the authors will respond to all that feedback as well.
I'm sorry. Let me ask. I don't even want to do this, but let me ask. Usual procedure requires that working group decisions get confirmed on the email list. Do we need to take this back to the email list to explicitly resolve? Do we need to repeat the dispatch call on the list and resolve it? Because for all that I prefer the answer you just stated. I don't know that I heard that much clarity, and whatever I heard, the process is that the working group decisions are to be confirmed on the email list.
Yeah, so this is taken in the context of having already had the discussion on the email list about how to dispatch this draft.
And that point, it's up to you guys.
So I think it'd be, I guess it'd be helpful to like maybe clarify the process here. I think one thing you could say is the decision's already been made and it was made like last time, and so this discussion is irrelevant. And the other thing you could say is this: we kicked it back and we're redeciding it. If the former is the case, then okay. If the latter is the case, then I do not think there was anything like consensus that the previous decision was right.
Yeah, so as it says here, it's asked to present in case there are further questions. Not a different decision, just questions about how this has been dispatched if there's not clear.
So I think if that was your opinion as chair, you should have raised that at the beginning of this conversation, not the end. That was not how this presentation was put forward. I mean, if we put poor Joel up here to redispatch this, he explained that clearly at the beginning of this. Is that, I mean, was that not what you thought was happening here as chair?
Did you get the feeling that we were redispatching that document?
Joel, did you get that feeling? Joel, did you say that at the beginning of the
I
meeting?
did
I'm pretty
say
sure
it.
you did. Yes. Were we in the same
I'd
room?
rather we
I mean,
weren't, but that's not my choice.
right, he was not happy about that, but it's clearly what he thought was happening. Yes.
I was told I had to represent it, and the only reason for representing is if it was possible to come to a different answer. And it's not a question of what I want out of this. I've worked for 2 years on this stinking document, 2.5 years. But that's not the question. And that's why I'm a little confused, actually.
Me too. So, Steve, yeah, I'm more confused than I was at the beginning, and increasingly so. I mean, I'm not that keen on this document, but I think somebody perhaps should buy Joel a beer or a beverage of some kind, because I don't think it's right to put him back here after we said it's AD sponsored and there's no working group. We should just follow that through, and the AD will or will not make an IETF last call, and we will or will not get consensus to proceed.
Thanks, Stephen. Yeah, Lars Egger, this time as the AD, right? So AD sponsored is the dispatch decision that I remember us taking, and that does include going to last call at some point, right? And so the admin discussed, the antitrust policy list. Contest web. Yeah, so you can blame me for suggesting that list. I was warned that it might not be accurate, but since it had the word antitrust in it, I kind of figured the people might still be on it that might care about this. So that is purely on me, right? This is not this, and it's confusing things. But I think so. What I like to see is discussion there, like a working group that would then, as AD, make me think that it's ready to at least attempt the last call on it, and it's the last call that will actually determine whether it goes forward. Why it's here, I don't know either, but I don't look at agendas.
It's here because you told me to.
Hey, Joel, if it's not confidential, who asked you to represent? Who asked you to come again and present?
Lars.
Lars?
Let's be clear.
That's what I thought, yeah.
Lars was asked by somebody else, and that I don't consider I'm free to say. But Lars said, based on that discussion, that I should come back here.
So Alyssa said it was Russ, which makes, because I have bad memory, but not that memory. But I certainly didn't tell you to come here for it to be redispatched, because that I would certainly remember. So if I said something, I might have said, maybe we'll see if, we can take it forward or
Russ
something.
Russ asked us to reconsider, but said he was explicitly not appealing the decision. That's why I was not blaming Russ. But then you said I should represent it here. The only way I can understand representing it is if there's some purpose for the working group having the discussion. I don't
Thank you for
waste people's time.
Thank you for refreshing my memory. So I thought Russ would be here to be at the microphone because there was a discussion that happened that was also not all on that list. And so I wanted to give him an opportunity to actually present his objections or input to the community, which hasn't happened. A lot of other things happened, but I was kind of hoping to make progress on this. But yes, thank you for reminding me. So that is the reason. Sort of, I wanted to give Russ an opportunity to outline his things, which he didn't. So maybe we'll ask him to do that
I
on the
can't
list.
do anything about that.
I know. Send me email. I'm sorry? You can. Sorry, Andrew.
Jay Daly is an author again. The objection was that there was a BOF held about antitrust policy back in 2013, and the result of that BOF was that no action was needed on a policy, only educational material should be produced.
And this is educational
yes,
material.
Exactly, and the objection was that this was going against that BOF, but it's the view of the authors and of the sponsoring AD that this is not going against that BOF because this is only educational material. That's right.
Okay, so I don't want to be like I was right, but yeah, we're not we're not changing the dispatch outcome. This is just a note for everyone. Andrew Campling, it's you, and then we move to the next item. Okay.
So just to provide some balance, given some of the other comments on the queue. I'm not a process expert in the IETF. Other people here certainly are. But in fairness to the chairs, they did say several times during the discussion that this wasn't to reconsider the dispatch question. I'm pretty sure that was said several times during this discussion, even though there seems to be confusion about it. So I thought it was worth just defending the chairs for once.
So,
well, thank you.
I believe the conclusion is we continue as we are going.
We continue as we're going.
Thank
Hopefully everyone knows which list to go to discuss this further. Thanks very much for presenting, Joel. Okay, so final item of this session, we have Stacey joining virtually. We can see you, Stacey. Do you want to just check your mic? We can hear you.
Yes, hello, can you hear me?
Yep, you're a little quiet, so maybe just change the mic to be next.
Okay. I'll also
Much
speak
better.
a bit louder at the risk of waking up people in my house.
Right. Take it away.
Great. Hi, everyone. I'm Stacey Hoffman. I will be speaking today a bit about a side meeting that we hosted at IETF 115 in London and a problem statement we've been working on around that. Just in case technology works against me today, I do have my colleague Marek in the room who can step in. He's the lucky one that got the travel budget to Yokohama. So quick note on kind of what we mean by policy expert as we go into this discussion is we're really talking about public policy. So the associated kind of societal, economic, and governance issues around that. And we do recognize that this expertise extends beyond government officials. I'm from the UK's Department for Science, Innovation and Technology. It can include industry, civil society, academia, and elsewhere. So if we go on to the next slide, I'm just going to do a quick overview of the side meeting we had in London. So we worked with ISOC, and a huge thank you to Olaf Kolkman and Karen O'Donoghue, who helped us deliver the side meeting. And we had participants from across IETF, IRTF, and IAB, with special thanks to Lars, Miria, and Colin, who participated in that side meeting. We also had policymakers from around the world join us, and we really appreciated all of the input from the kind of the wider IETF communities. We were discussing the benefits and challenges of policymaker engagement, so looking specifically more from kind of the government official angle, and we left off touching on related work and potential ways forward. And I think that's really why we're here today, is to kind of talk about what next steps might look like. So if we go to the next slide, it gives a quick overview of the problem statement that we've been working on. We believe that there's benefit to policy expertise within having that within the IETF. It adds value to the IETF's work and the relationships with global standards and internet governance bodies within that system. So for instance, really reinforcing the multi-stakeholder process, allowing for earlier detection of deployment issues, so making more robust and resilient standards, strengthening the IETF internationally, so helping us avoid duplication of effort, helping us avoid fragmenting that technical core of the internet. And these are just a few of the kind of the benefits that we've identified. We'd really be interested to hear if others have some more thoughts on potential benefits of policy expertise within the IETF. At the same time, we talked about the challenges and barriers to that, to bringing that into the standards process. I think the biggest one that we've touched on was really bridging the technical and policy discussions. These seem to be happening, in their separate rooms on separate email lists, and they're not, I think, bridged together. They're not brought together in the same space as well as they could be. And then also, once we've done the kind of awareness raising and the capacity building with policy experts to understand, the value of the IETF and how they could engage, there's not really a landing point for those people. So there's a bit of a culture question here as well. And if we go into the next slide, we're going to talk about a bit of the kind of the onward thinking we've done from that work is, what kind of initiatives could help us address the challenges. So this is our first attempt at a gap analysis, looking at work that's going on in the IETF. So we found 3 kind of work streams that are relevant. One is communication, other is education and upskilling, and then the last one being kind of around the community and culture aspect. I think that the education and upskilling part is where there's the most work going on within and the IETF. I mean, EmoDear is a really great initiative, and we're really excited to see things happening there. There's also a lot happening outside of the IETF. So for instance, ISOC's policymaker program, and then stakeholders like Article 19 and CDT putting out some really good resources as well. So I think we're interested in kind of supporting that work, but there's not as much for us to do there. We think the biggest gaps are around the communication and community aspects. So we do have some work going on, within respective roles, but these could be strengthened. I think from the IRTF side, where we have the HRPC group and then the new RASP group, I think there's a lot that we can pull from there, but we still think that there's that problem statement around how do we actually bring this expertise into standards development? How do we bridge those technology and policy discussions? So that we really would like some kind of community input on this, and also, are there things in our gap analysis that we've missed that we also need to take into account? Next slide, please. And I think this is my last one. So why we're here today is really to talk about next steps and how we should go forward. This is just a proposal. We're really open to kind of hearing from others. We think there's value in doing this work somewhere that covers the whole problem space. It can include IETF, RITF, and IAB, because we don't think that it is something that is a part of just one of those environments. So what we're proposing is ultimately aiming for a working group, something that would be time limited, very tightly scoped. So looking at problem statement, gap analysis, and then potential recommendations on ways forward. Critically, we would really like more community input. So if there are others that would like to contribute to the work, that can help us with that, that would be great. I don't have the answer to this question. I can't do it alone. So we would really welcome that wider input and engagement. I think for next steps, what I would probably recommend is that we go away and we draft a charter for discussion, and possibly using the GenDispatch list. So thank you. I can't believe I got through that whole slide deck without being interrupted.
Pete, just before you speak, to the room and to our remote participants, we wanted to, as chair, we wanted to give the opportunity to Stacy to socialize a bit this topic. On the other hand, we are aware that the supporting document was published quite late in the process, so not giving you the ability to look into that. So the dispatch question might be a bit premature today, but still you have the opportunity to raise questions to Stacy, and ultimately that the dispatch question may come back again in the future.
Hi, Pete Resnick, and I did read the draft. A strange thing to say at meetings. I think the community that you are part of is quite good at figuring out ways to communicate in different languages in different ways with different communities. I think the community that I am generally part of is lousy at it. The idea of having an IETF working group to discuss this, I think, is probably going to lead to bad places. I think what you want to do is have this be either an IAB type group or some other way of connecting with the IETF community that does not involve the IETF community trying to directly communicate with policymakers and other folks in this space. I think it's perfectly reasonable for the education efforts that are currently going on to train folks in your community to communicate this weird language that technologists use in the standardization community. I think that's helpful and can be useful, but I think the communication in the other direction should probably be mediated in some reasonable way. And I think the IRTF, I think, has done some work in this area, but I don't think it's uniquely suited to it. I think some sort of program or otherwise through the IAB is probably the best way to go. And I would lean against dispatching this to a working group at any cost.
Thanks, Pete. Really appreciate that feedback. Yeah, IAB is definitely somewhere that there's been a lot of discussion about taking something forward. I think right now we're really focused on kind of the problem statement and gap analysis. And so that, I think that's less of the kind of the actual solution and what we might do in practice going on from that. So, but really, really useful feedback. Thank you.
Yeah. So I think first, I think the fact that you had quite a long list of like quasi-existing efforts in that space, and I think that none of those are going particularly well. And so I think that like the just doing an M+ first one is probably not like a good plan. So I think that trying to create an IETF working group in the space for the reasons Pete indicated will not go well. I also read your draft. I find the problem statement a little confusing, frankly. I suspect there are a number of problem statements. Some of which, there's some around visibility, some around, I think, policymakers feeling perhaps they don't have a lot of influence in like what is happening at IETF, probably some others as well. I suspect that when you broke those out, people here be sympathetic to some of them and less sympathetic to others. I guess I would say, trying to have like an IETF effort in this space or an IEB effort probably is not going to work out super well. I think what I would suggest is perhaps try to sharpen it to, and maybe I'm just today saying make your problem smaller all the time, but make your problem smaller. Try to solve one of these problems. Frankly, I think the one I think is perhaps most approachable is lack of policymaker visibility of what's going on. That's something I think that most people here be in favor of, and that we don't necessarily do a good job of. And I can imagine how to fix that. I think one way to try to address that problem, not so much a gap analysis, would maybe to like try to think about a few cases where the policymakers felt like they didn't get visibility they were hoping for, and try to figure out why they haven't. And then we could talk about what mechanisms will make that easier. I think the one that I would like very strongly discourage would be attempting to the problem of policymakers feeling enough influence what happens at IETF. I can talk endlessly about why efforts in that space have failed before, and I'm happy to do so, but probably not at this moment. I can tell you that's a hard problem and will not be solved by the kind of mechanisms you're discussing.
Yeah, I think those are really useful comments. I think that kind of the first point around understanding some of the kind of existing work in this space. I think that's kind of key, and I think that like part of what we're trying to do with this is to kind of understand like across those pieces, kind of, as you say, sort of what's working and what could kind of be improved. And so I think that that's like part of the rationale for something that's not kind of in each of those spaces, kind of in just one of them. I think that on kind of breaking out the different aspects of the problem statement, I think that's just kind of like the biggest thing that we kind of have as the next step in terms of like fleshing those out and potentially putting some examples to that. So I think that that's just what we kind of are really keen to get community input on, because I think that it's not a kind of one way from kind of sort of policy oriented people, but this is about kind of like the kind of two-way, how can we help each other? So I think we're just looking for a kind of space for that. But yeah, thank you for the comments.
Okay, just in the interest of time and draining the queue, you can respond obviously to points, but don't feel like you have to present it. And Stephen, you're next in the queue.
So Stephen, I guess I agree with Pete and Ecker, so I won't repeat that. I also don't really agree that a coherent approach is needed, which was on one of the slides. It's not clear that policy making is generally that coherent, at least from my perspective, but I guess you guys know more about it. And if we did have a coherent approach, then we run the danger of having a marketing, a lobbying, all sorts of other non-technical kind of groups also wanting to be part of a coherent approach. So I think that's another reason to be kind of wary of this, and definitely not a working group.
Alyssa Cooper. Yeah, I agree with the previous speakers. In terms of gap analysis, it's interesting to me that from my perspective, actually the core and the strongest engagement that we have historically had from policymakers in the IETF is not present in really the document or the discussion of this, and that's having policy experts and regulators directly engage in the IETF process, which we've done very successfully for decades and decades throughout all of the work on internet telephony, emergency services, broadband mapping, caller authentication, to some extent around encryption, like very direct input and engagement that in some cases like fed all of the requirements that we then built a new technology around. So I think we're going to do gap analysis on this. It really needs to actually reflect that reality. I would also say, you know, I'm a person who spent my first 7 years here in the IETF working for a civil society organization, and the 3 years following that engaged in a gigantic geopolitical process to successfully complete the IANA transition. So I think we have a lot of this engagement in many different ways with FCC, Ofcom, CRTC, NTIA, the European Commission, Congress. Some of us have testified before Congress on behalf of the IETF. So I think we need to get like a much more fulsome view of the reality on the ground in order to figure out if there's something that needs to be done here. And I bring up all those examples because the other thing to me that's very important to keep in mind is the power of the IETF model. And I think even in the draft, there's some suggestions that start to hint at trying to change that, to give special privilege or, you know, the landing point. Everyone wants a landing point in the IETF, right? There's no map for anybody. But I think that's like where some of the resistance is around this notion that you would alter the IETF process in order to accommodate, you know, some special path. And that I think is a dangerous construct when we think about the efficacy of the IETF and its uniqueness in the realm of, you know, global SDOs and internet forums. So I think that's, I don't think we need a working group for this, in part because I think, you know, suggestions that we change the IETF process because of the interactions that do or do not exist are potentially pretty risky.
Thank you, Alyssa. So sorry, just to come in quickly. I think I'm sorry to hear that you think that we're trying to kind of change IETF process. That's not at all kind of what we're getting at here. We really are keen on having policy experts work within the IETF and within the structure that's set out and within the processes that have been set out as well. So I don't think we're looking for any kind of fundamental change in that sense. It's just about how do we bridge those technical and policy discussions. And you brought up some really good examples of how that has happened in the past. I think that we might want to kind of talk to you so that we can learn from experience there and see what has worked. As Mark said, I think it's a good approach that we're trying to understand what has worked, what hasn't worked, and where can we kind of do more to strengthen that. It's not about giving policymakers, this is not specific to policymakers, you know, an into the environment at all. It's about how do we bridge policy discussions, which is wider than just policymakers, with those technical discussions as well. So I think that you've brought up a lot of really good points that we will take away in our next kind of iteration of our gap analysis. Thank you. Sorry.
Thank you, Sassy. Wes, sorry, time is up. We need to end the meeting. Just to conclude on that, we've heard clear no working group, but I think the question was a bit premature. More generally, we believe that more work is needed for any reasonable dispatch question to be asked, and I get the impression that the authors agree with that. Thank you very much, Stacey. Thank you all, and see you in San Francisco. This is the end of the dispatch session.
Yeah, sure.